stand at a train station platform. You've just arrived in the Lake District. The guidebook says climb Orrest Head first, a gentle 20-minute walk, an orientation, a warm-up. You reach the summit, and suddenly you're standing on compressed ocean mud looking at fire. To the north, Borrowdale volcanics, ash and lava, hardened against weather, ancient violence frozen in stone. Beneath your feet, quiet sediment, the soft settling of a closing ocean, mud that became slate, unremarkable, accessible, a grandstand carved by ice. This is the irony I want to explore today. Welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, author of Cumbrian Verse, Lakes to Fells in Poetry. Every week we slow down, we listen closely, we discover the poetry living in the gap between what's dramatic and what's merely useful, between the peaks that demand respect and the hills that offer perspective. Today's journey, William Wordsworth's monumental Tintern Abbey, a poem that redefined how we observe landscapes, how memory transforms place, and why returning changes everything. Then, my own poem, Orrest Head, where Sunday boots and pram wheels climb a roche montagne to witness volcanic grandeur from a platform of compressed mud. After that, I want to hear from you. What guest poem should I read next? Email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. Let's begin where the humble becomes the perfect vantage point. For this deeply reflective 30-minute episode, we're going to embark on a profound meditation regarding how we observe landscapes, who precisely is granted the privilege to observe them, and the beautiful, quiet irony that the most spectacular views of geological and historical drama often come from standing upon the profoundly undramatic. When we think of observing the landscape, when we consider the very act of stepping back to take in the sublime and the beautiful, it's almost impossible not to turn to the great romantics. Therefore, my choice for today's guest poem is a monumental work by William Wordsworth, a poem that essentially redefined the relationship between the human mind and the natural world. I've chosen lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey, on revisiting the banks of the Wye during a tour, July 13, 1798. This is a poem about memory, about the passage of time, and about how our perception of a place changes as we ourselves change. It asks us to consider the layers of observation, the immediate sensory experience of the landscape, and the secondary, perhaps more vital experience of recalling that landscape when we're far away, trapped in the noise of modern life. Wordsworth is not just painting a picture of a ruined abbey and a river. He is dissecting the very mechanics of human observation and emotional retention. Choosing this poem felt essential for today's theme because it sets the ultimate foundation for understanding that looking at a view is never just a passive act. It's a deeply philosophical engagement with the earth beneath our feet and the history stored in our own minds. Before I read this magnificent piece, I want to situate us in the moment of its creation. It's the summer of 1798. William Wordsworth is 28 years old, walking with his beloved sister Dorothy through the Wye Valley in Wales. He'd visited this exact spot 5 years earlier in 1793, during a time of immense personal and political turmoil in his life, having recently returned from revolutionary France. Now, 5 years later, he stands above the ruined Tintern Abbey, looking down at the steep woods, the pastoral farms and the River Wye. The abbey itself, a magnificent Gothic ruin reclaimed by nature since the dissolution of the monasteries, is actually barely mentioned in the poem. The focus is entirely on the landscape and the mind of the poet observing it. As you listen, I want you to pay attention to how Wordsworth describes the act of seeing. Notice the privilege inherent in his position. He's a man of leisure, walking for pleasure, observing the hermit's fire and the vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods from a distance. He's a spectator to the landscape, but he also relies on that landscape to sustain his soul when he returns to the towns and cities. This poem is long, a flowing river of blank verse that demands we slow down and let the language wash over us. It's a meditation on the gifts that nature gives to those who know how to look, and a poignant realization that the wild, thoughtless youth he was 5 years ago has been replaced by a more sober, deeply reflective observer who hears the still, sad music of humanity. So find a quiet space, perhaps look out of your own window, and let us travel back to the banks of the River Wye. 5 years have passed, 5 summers with the length of 5 long winters, and again I hear these waters rolling from their mountain springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day is come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild, these pastoral farms, green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees, with some uncertain notice, as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave, where by his fire the hermit sits alone. These beauteous forms, through a long absence, have not been to me as is a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft, in lonely rooms, and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them, in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood, and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration, feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as we have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less, I trust to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. If this be but a vain belief, yet oh, how oft in darkness, and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir unprofitable and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how oft, in spirit, have I turned to thee, O sylvan Wye, thou wanderer through the woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee? And now, with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the pitch of the mind revives again, while here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that in this moment there is life and food for future years. And so I dare to hope, though changed no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature, then the coarser pleasure of my boyish days, and their glad animal movements, all gone by to me, was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion, the tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood. Their colours and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye. That time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn nor murmur, other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe, abundant recompense. For I have learnt to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows, and the woods and mountains, and of all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what perceive, well pleased to recognise in nature and the language of the sense the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart, and soul of all my moral being. There is a profound, almost overwhelming gravity to Tintern Abbey that completely shifts the way we understand the act of observation. Wordsworth is offering us a blueprint for how to store a landscape within the human mind. He begins by noting the exact duration of his absence: 5 years, 5 summers, 5 long winters. This immediately establishes that the landscape is not merely a physical location, but a marker of time and personal evolution. When he describes the steep and lofty cliffs, the pastoral farms green to the very door, and the wreaths of smoke rising in silence, he's creating a deeply visual inventory. But the true genius of the poem reveals itself when he admits that these beauteous forms have not been to him as is a landscape to a blind man's eye. Instead, they've been his salvation in the din of towns and cities. He introduces the concept that the landscape is a battery of emotional and spiritual energy, charged by observation and discharged in moments of urban weariness. However, as we consider our theme today of who gets to observe the landscape, we must look critically at Wordsworth's position. He's a gentleman of leisure. He observes the vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods and the hermit sitting alone by his fire, not as equals, but aesthetic elements of the scenery. They are parts of the landscape, romanticised figures that contribute to his sublime experience. He has the luxury to walk the hills, to feel the joy of elevated thoughts, while the true inhabitants of the woods are merely trying to survive the elements. This brings us to a crucial tension in nature writing and landscape poetry. The view belongs to the one who has the time, the freedom, and the societal standing to stand still and simply look. Furthermore, Wordsworth acknowledges a shift in his own observing eye. The dizzy raptures of his youth, when nature was an appetite and a passion, have been replaced by a mature, philosophical gaze. He now hears the still, sad music of humanity. He recognises that observing the physical world is ultimately a way of observing the mind of man. He stands on the banks of the Wye, a relatively peaceful, undramatic vantage point, to access a sublime spiritual drama. This idea that the quiet, accessible places serve as grandstands for the deepest revelations perfectly transitions us into our exploration of how we interact with geology, geography, and the physical spaces we're allowed to traverse today. Moving from the sprawling, romantic valleys of Wales, I want to bring us northward to the striking and complex terrain of Cumbria and the Lake District. For my own poem this episode, I've chosen a piece called Orrest Head. This poem was born from a very specific realisation I had while walking up the well-trodden path from Windermere Station. Orrest Head is famous as the first viewpoint Alfred Wainwright visited, igniting his lifelong passion for the fells. But what fascinated me was not just the view, but the ground I was actually standing on to see that view. It's a poem that directly tackles our theme. The irony that the best view of drama comes from standing on the completely undramatic, and how the accessibility of a landscape changes who gets to experience the sublime. If you've ever taken the train into Windermere, you know that the moment you step out of the station, the town surrounds you. But just across the road lies the gateway to Orrest Head. It's a short, steady climb, heavily paved in parts, accessible to almost anyone. It's the democratization of the mountain view. You'll see people in heavy, expensive hiking boots, alongside families pushing prams, all making the same ascent. But geologically speaking, Orrest Head is something of a quiet bystander to the violence of the Lake District. It's made of Banisdale slate, formed from the quiet settling of mud at the bottom of an ancient ocean. Yet, when you reach the top of this modest hill, you're presented with a panoramic grandstand view at the central massif, the Borrowdale volcanics, a jagged, dramatic skyline born of ash, fire, and continental collisions. This poem, Orrest Head, is an exploration of that stark contrast. It's about how we pave over the quiet history of the earth to make it easier for Sunday boots and pram wheels to ascend, so that we might all stand on compressed mud and look out at a frozen memory of fire. A low outlier of Banisdale slate, finely laminated, cleavage dipping south. Not the volcanic violence of the central massif, but the quiet settling of an ancient, closing ocean. The ice respected no distinction, scouring the northern approach to a long, slow ramp, then plucking the lee into jagged, fractured steps, a classic ruche mountainy disguised by beach. The tarmac path ignores the bedding plane, sealing the mudstone from the rain's interrogation, lifting the Sunday boots and the pram wheels up from the station to the sudden open air. At the summit, the slate map mirrors the ground beneath, a flat grey table naming the serrated horizon. To the north, the Borrowdale volcanics rise, ash and lava hardened against the weather. Here we stand on compressed mud to look at fire, a grandstand carved by the same retreating glacier that gouged the lake bed deep enough to hold the sky. In Orrest Head, taken from my latest book, Cumbria in Verse Lakes to Fells in Poetry, I wanted to strip away the immediate romanticism of the view and start with the cold, hard, unglamorous reality of the rock itself. The opening lines establish a geological foundation, a low outlier of Banisdale slate, finely laminated, cleavage dipping south. It's essentially compressed mud from an ancient closing ocean. There is a distinct lack of drama here. It's not the volcanic violence of the central massif, but the landscape has a shared trauma. The glaciers of the last ice age, the immense rivers of ice, respected no distinction between the quiet slate and the violent volcanic rock. The ice scoured them both, shaping Orrest Head into a classic Rouge Montagnais, a sheepback rock, slowly ramped on one side and violently plucked on the other. Though this brutal history is now softly disguised by beech trees. The crux of the poem and its connection to our theme of observation happens on the ascent. The tarmac path ignores the bedding plane, sealing the mudstone from the rain's interrogation. We've paved over the geological history to create a smooth, accessible ramp. This path lifts the Sunday boots and the pram wheels up from the station to the sudden open air. This is where the landscape becomes democratised. Unlike Wordsworth's solitary, privileged wandering, Orrest Head allows the everyday person, families, the elderly, those pushing prams to achieve the summit. They are all lifted out of the ordinary town and into the sublime. When we reach the top, the irony becomes fully apparent. There is a slate map at the summit, a flat grey table that names the peaks on the serrated horizon. Here we stand on compressed mud to look at fire. We are situated on the quiet, unassuming remnants of an ocean floor to observe the jagged, dramatic remnants of explosive ash and lava. It is a profound irony that to appreciate the immense, terrifying power of the Earth's creation, we must stand in a place of relative safety and geological dullness. The Grandstand itself was carved by the retreating glacier that gouged the lake bed deep enough to hold the sky. It's all connected. The undramatic observer's platform is necessary to frame the drama of the horizon. It poses the question, do we need the mundane to truly comprehend the magnificent? I believe we do. Without the accessible ramp of Orrest Head, the sheer scale of the Borrowdale volcanics might remain a distant, unapproachable mystery, much like the esoteric world of high literature before it's made accessible to the common reader. And that beautifully bridges into our discussion segment for today, where we will talk about a different kind of accessibility and landscape, the landscape of modern publishing. And now let's transition from the physical landscapes of the Wye Valley and the Cumbrian fells to the often equally daunting, sometimes jagged, and entirely fascinating landscape of the creative life, focusing on the writing, publishing, and marketing of poetry. Today I want to have a deeply thorough discussion about self-publishing, examining it as a way of carving our own accessible paths, much like the tarmac path up Orrest Head that allows everyone to experience the view. I want to focus specifically on utilising Barnes & Noble Press for creating physical paperbacks and their Nook platform for ebooks. In the past, the traditional publishing industry functioned much like the central massif of the Lake District, a towering, intimidating structure, beautiful from a distance, but fiercely difficult to scale without the right gear, the right guides, or the right connections. Gatekeepers guarded the valleys. But the advent of sophisticated self-publishing platforms has democratized the literary landscape, allowing writers to build their own viewpoints and invite readers directly up the hill to see their work. Barnes & Noble Press is a particularly elegant tool in this endeavour. Why choose Barnes & Noble over other platforms? For me, it comes down to a feeling of tactile quality and the distinct identity of the bookseller. When you decide to bring a poetry collection into the physical world, the aesthetics matter profoundly. Poetry is not just text, it's the use of white space, the rhythm of the page turns, the physical weight of the paper. Barnes & Noble Press offers an incredibly intuitive dashboard that respects the author's control over these elements. You're tasked with selecting your trim size, deciding between a matte or a glossy cover, choosing between cream or white paper. Cream paper, I often find, offers a softer, more forgiving background for poetry, mimicking the historical warmth of classic volumes, while white paper provides a stark, modern contrast for experimental layouts. The process of formatting a paperback manuscript requires meticulous attention to detail. Every margin, every gutter, every orphan line must be considered. It forces the poet to become the architect of their own book. When you finally order a physical proof copy and it arrives in your hands, the emotional resonance is akin to reaching the summit. You have taken intangible thoughts, digital words, and manifested them into a bound object that carries the Barnes & Noble standard of quality, ready to be shelved in a reader's home. But physical books are only half of the modern landscape. The digital realm is where the rapid, instantaneous connection happens, and this is where the Nook platform becomes invaluable. Formatting an ebook for Nook requires a different mindset. You must relinquish the rigid control of the physical page and embrace flowable text. Your stanzas must be robust enough to survive readers changing font sizes or reading on small mobile screens. What the Nook platform offers is immediate, frictionless access to an established ecosystem of dedicated readers. You are placing your work directly into a marketplace backed by a legacy bookseller, allowing your poetry to travel across borders instantly. Marketing this self-published work, however, requires a shift in how you view yourself. You are no longer just the solitary poet on the hill. You are the guide, the marketeer, the bookseller. You must learn to articulate the heart of your collection, to design covers that arrest the eye, and to engage with readers on social media, at local bookshops, or through podcasts just like this one. Self-publishing with Barnes & Noble and Nook is not simply a fallback option. It is a deliberate, empowering choice. It's a way of bypassing the traditional gatekeepers and saying, I have built the path, I have bound the pages. Come and share this view with me. It requires immense labour, a willingness to learn the technical challenges of bleed margins and EPUB files. But the reward is absolute ownership of your creative destiny. It mirrors our theme of observation perfectly. You are choosing where to stand, you are choosing how to frame the view, and you are choosing to make the beauty of your words accessible to anyone willing to take the walk with you. Now I have read a guest poem, you've listened to one of my poems, and we've discussed self-publishing with Barnes & Noble and Nook. I'd love to hear from you. If there's a poem you'd like me to feature as a guest poem in a future episode, please email me at aldencaro78@gmail.com. That's aldencaro78@gmail.com. It could be a classic, something modern, or even a personal favourite that means a lot to you. This way, the podcast becomes a shared journey. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may you find the poetry in the everyday, and I'll speak to you again on Wednesday.